And here in Europe, Denmark has taken over the rotating presidency of the EU from Poland. One of Denmark's key aims is to see Ukraine join the European Union. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has traveled to Denmark for the occasion. Ukraine's membership bid for the EU has stalled, but Denmark's Prime Minister has vowed to do all she can to help Ukraine become a member state. Now, the presidency is for 6 months and Denmark is tasked with shaping the bloc's agenda. Denmark has listed security and migration as key topics, but getting consensus could prove tricky.
The decor is up, and so is the pressure as Denmark's half year at the helm of the Council of the European Union kicks off.
There's war on our continent. The geopolitical realities are changing, and we are facing challenges from mass migration, climate change, and global competition. To be very short, Europe faces the greatest challenges in generations.
Denmark says the two top priorities will be a secure Europe and a competitive and green Europe. Under its plans for a secure Europe, Denmark puts Ukraine high on the agenda, both in continuing to support Kyiv militarily against Russia and in bringing Ukraine closer to EU membership, while closing borders more tightly against undocumented migrants.
Security is also about migration. We need a more robust Europe with better control of the influxes into the EU, which is why we would like to prioritize legislation on returns and work for new and innovative solutions.
Denmark may suggest some of its own innovative solutions, which have included controversial decisions to send Syrians back to their country quickly, and the idea to, for example, pay Rwanda to hold asylum applicants while Copenhagen processes their requests. When it comes to the second Danish priority, a competitive and green future, one expert says the EU has actually been going backward on the environmental protection side.
What it has been doing for the past 6 months is to furiously dismantle or try to dismantle that Green Deal and its climate ambitions. It still speaks a wonderful game, but when you look at the details of what it is doing, it is decreasing ambition in this regard terribly, and it will be terribly behind in meeting its own climate obligations and targets.
Danish climate activist Lotte Leicht points to the EU Commission's own polling last month, showing 85% of respondents consider climate change a serious problem for the world, and even in some member states, the most pressing issue.
I hope this poll will sort of be a wake-up call also for the Danish presidency in understanding we need to get back to the ambition in terms of climate when it comes to the EU Green Deal.
Leicht would like to see her country go even further and combine the leverage of this EU position and its temporary seat on the United Nations Security Council to launch a formal inquiry at the UN into the global consequences of the melting ice sheet of Greenland, a semi-autonomous region of Denmark. But speaking of Greenland, one thing the Danish presidency will have to keep an eye on is another presidency. If U.S. President Donald Trump moves ahead with his threats to take over Greenland, achieving the goal of a more secure Europe is going to be much more difficult.
Lots on the agenda for Denmark. Let's get more from DW correspondent Rosie Bouchard, who is in Aarhus in Denmark, where a ceremony will mark the start of the country's EU presidency. Rosie, good to see you. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy is also in Aarhus today. What does he want from the meetings he'll have?
Hi there. Yeah, I am at the Danish royal summer residence here in the city of Aarhus. And of course, they had a last-minute announcement to their guest list in President Zelenskyy. Now, President Zelenskyy has come to Denmark with a clear wish list, and this comes amid uncertainty about future deliveries of US weapons. Now, Denmark has been a pioneer in what's known in circles of those who follow Ukraine's defence as the Danish model. And that's essentially where Denmark organises procurement for Ukraine directly with production inside Ukraine. So producing weapons for Ukrainian use inside the country. And during his visit here, President Zelenskyy says Ukraine has signed a new deal in terms of co-production of drones, and this is with a US private company. Now, he's framing this as a big win, as a big news for Ukrainians, and something, of course, that which might serve to distract in some way for those bigger uncertainties when it comes to the United States government. He says he will be counting on Denmark to step up. We know that Denmark has been a big military supporter of Ukraine in general, but this is a time of great uncertainty across this European Union. Denmark starts, as of now, July, its 6-month rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. But we know that not all EU member states are on board when it comes to supporting Ukraine, particularly when it comes to Hungary, which is so often at odds with other EU member states.
So while all of this is happening, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has also announced that he will have a phone call with US President Donald Trump on Thursday. What can we expect from that phone call?
Well, quite right. And you may imagine that those here in the European Union view that phone call or expected phone call with a great deal of trepidation, because we know that Denmark, for example, was a big player in what we talked about a lot a few months ago, which was called the Coalition of the Willing. So those countries that said they were willing to go in and back up in some way or other an eventual peace deal in Ukraine with boots on the ground. Now, that's somewhat slipped off the agenda recently because there's been less fear that the United States might be trying to cut a quick deal in Ukraine, which would, many feared, sacrifice or be to the detriment of European security. With that phone call coming up, those fears will be very much back on the agenda, and Ukraine will be looking for clear backing from its European partners. That's something I think the Danes will be trying to project here. There is one other thing the Danes kind of have to offer, which the Ukrainian side are really looking at very carefully, and that's when it comes to advancing Ukraine's bid for membership, because Ukraine wants to be a part of the European Union. It wants to be part of this club. The Danish government says that it's going to do everything in its power to try and advance that, but the truth is that on their two, Hungary is blocking. It has a veto power, and Denmark, its Prime Minister, when pressed on exactly how she'd convince the Hungarians, well, she didn't have a clear response. She said it was still too soon to say, but they certainly have committed to doing everything in their power, they say, to trying to get Ukraine toward that seat at the table at the European Union headquarters, which it has been so long dreaming of.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Rosie Beshad in Aarhus in Denmark. Thanks so much.